Hello, everyone. Today is February 8th, 2022. I'm here today with Michael Carrol. Michael is a dear friend and a customer success manager. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Michael.
What's up, Cruz? Number 4?
Number 4, recurring.
Love it.
I need to get the dates, the last date you were here on. It's been a while, this one.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think last time we talked, it was like right when I started my last job in like May. Um, yeah, it's about
That's right.
almost a year ago. Yeah,
Wow. And you switched jobs?
yeah. I switched jobs again to a new company. It's like a construction management software, um, and doing similar roles, but in customer success. So basically, focusing on retention, have a book of business, and making sure that they're happy and um, having a good experience, so that way they don't churn, with our product that we have.
Nice. That's You've been doing work like that for a while now, correct? Customer relations
Yeah,
and retention.
yeah, it's like what I kind of just fell into it. Didn't really want to do anything like that, but I really like it actually. Yeah, really since college, that's like what I've been focused on is working specifically with customers and then making sure that they're just having a good experience. And then got kind of lucky with where I stumbled on, and it's been kind of like a good career path for me. And don't I don't have like a specialization or anything like that, but I feel like I do a pretty good job of just taking care of people. I think that's one of it's weird. It's one of the things I've realized that I like to be for like from like friends, relationships is like being very dependable. So I think that like relates really well to my job is making sure I'm like dependable for my customers and ultimately make sure that they have a good experience.
Yes, that's the most important thing is the customer. I mean, we appreciate our income and it provides a lot of comfort to do things that we enjoy in our life. I mean, we can enjoy our career and hopefully people do enjoy it, but that income is huge to just feel comfortable. And like you said, you like to provide, and in order to provide for your friends and your family, you need to have an income, and in order to have an income you have to provide to your customer.
100%. Yeah, it's an interesting way to like put that full circle. Um, but yeah, you're absolutely right. 100%.
Yes, and like you said, you stumbled upon it. I stumbled upon systems engineering, which is the idea that there's multiple systems and a sort of technological, or there's systems within a piece of technology, or a series of pieces of technologies, and it, it's not always obvious how those pieces of technology come together and integrate. And so a big piece of my work, as you know, has been, I didn't choose that as much as it kind of chose me based off of where I was living and my college degree. But what
I was gonna say it's I wonder like the amount of people that are in careers today just based on kind of like accident, you know what I mean? Like it just kind of stumbled upon thing and like you said, where they were at the time and what there were where they were willing to move and what money they were willing to take. And
yes.
then like all of a sudden it just, ends up being something that's your career long term. It's just weird to think about because a lot of people don't what you go to school for, you don't always more than often you don't end up doing like what you went to school for,
No,
which is interesting.
it is interesting. I mean, choosing a career at 18, or degree, doesn't, like, it's tough. Like, there's
Yeah,
a
it's insane.
it's insane. And it's like, do you even understand what's going on in the world? Like, it is it's and the game's been changed. I don't want to say completely, but a lot's been changed about like getting a job and the availabilities of jobs and the types of jobs that are out there. I, you, the way that
Also,
what
I was gonna say how so.
interviewing, recruiting, I feel like recruiting has gotten, I don't know, because I entered the job market in 2016, 2015, but I feel like recruiting has just gotten huge in the last
Yeah.
2 to 3 years, maybe a little bit longer, but it's like where I don't think that was always a need for a company. Now it's like you almost 100% need a recruiter because, and that has changed the dynamic of the availability of jobs. And it's, I don't know, I've heard that actually the .com boom was pretty similar in the sense that there hadn't been like when the .com boom happened, there was a really high availability of jobs for everyone, and then it kind of crashed and then that dropped, but now it's kind of back up there. So I mean, I think, as far as your job, like construction management, that's your construction's huge and things are
Yeah.
getting torn down and built up faster than ever, and people want, new buildings. And a lot of, I think, the East Coast is getting pretty old.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be in an industry that even through, like crypto is a pretty interesting industry to be involved in, or like NFTs or something like that, because, who knows? I mean,
Yeah. Who knows? It's just the beginning, and nobody even knows. I feel like even if people say they know what the heck it is, you don't really know what the heck it is,
no.
and like what it's gonna be or what it will be.
No. And yes, you don't know what it's going to be, where it's going to go, like the difference, like in established industries like defense or construction, or you know what's another one, maybe not tech because it's pretty evolving,
Yeah,
but
relatively new.
yes, but even the car industry or things like that, what you're going to get. There's going to be customers next year. It's not going to be like a crazy swing. So
Yeah.
that's nice. And it's, crypto might become absolutely massive within 5 to 10 years. I don't know how it's going to become massive, but in that case, then when there's more stability in even the technology and the value in the technology, then there's a higher chance that there's going to be solid employment in that industry as well, and it will be an industry that people can feel comfortable and even like really want to get involved in because there's good money there.
I feel like people are already going that way. Like there's so many crypto companies and jobs out there. Like
Yes,
even just my job search that I just had, like just looking around, there's so many crypto companies that you could work for now, and I don't even
really.
know in what. Yeah, it's nuts. It's interesting, and I think they like instead of like stock options, they'll like do something like pay you in Bitcoin or something weird like that. So it's interesting to see um, what the future is. But what to your point too about like the recruiting side of things, my first job out of college, they didn't have recruiters, and like my
No,
manager
mine
like
too.
hired me. And
Yes.
then as I got into that company, like when I left in 2019, they had like a full blown recruiting company. Um, that was in 3.5 years. So it's interesting that you say that because you're absolutely right. Like that's just managers would follow up with you, and but it's also I think going back to what you said about like the tech industry, there's so many more softwares that allow you the ability to make that process more streamlined to make it easier for you to get recruited, and
Yes.
make it easier for recruiters to do something like that too. So I think that's also plays a role into that too.
It does play a role, and it's going to be, like I alluded to the .com boom, how that helped the employees a lot as well. But people, remote work, and like you said, these different types of avenues, like of streamlining, getting the company in touch with the employee is really going to play in favor of the employee, because now he can have literally any company see his, like, marketing for employees is much easier than ever.
Yeah,
And find, these connections are just so much simpler that, if you have the skills, it's going to be possible. That's going to be so much cost savings, and so much more
yeah,
work is going to get done. it
100%.
it's an interesting form of networking that's changed because of social networking. And another interesting phenomenon, I mean, this one's kind of more recent, much more recent. Like, that one's been pretty gradual. This has been pretty gradual too. Um, you know, the famous podcaster Joe Rogan has, gotten into some issues because of a video of him saying some, pretty raunchy things. I mean, he uses
Hmm.
the N word multiple times, and you know, it's it's interesting the amount of, I don't know, maybe it was just my streams that I was finding, but I was finding a lot of people backing him, saying, yes, this was a terrible thing, but his reaction, his overwhelming amount that he has done, and his connections with Black people as well. I know he has a tour with Dave Chappelle. Um, so it was interesting for me to see that, even though some more centralized forms of media were scrutinizing him, that the decentralized media, through through social media networks such as Instagram and Twitter, overwhelmingly seemed to support him. Like, there were
Yeah,
a lot of people that came out and said, I support Joe Rogan. And that seemed much stronger than the
the opposition.
centralized media's take. What was that?
Then the opposition, right?
Yes. Yes, it
Yeah.
did.
I feel the same way, but I feel like we're very similar in that what we follow, maybe that it's just more curated to us and what we see. So I thought the same thing. I was like, everything I'm seeing and reading is like, hey, I stand with him and blah blah blah. But again, maybe that's just more curated. Our algorithms, because we follow certain things, are more curated to show us that rather than the opposition. Because I'm sure for other people it might be different. But I always wonder, like why can't we? Like, why didn't I see? I didn't see a ton of like weird stuff, or like where is it even coming from? That's what I want to know. And it's
What's
also interesting. Go ahead.
where's what coming from?
Like, who's saying that stuff? Like, I guess is what I want to. Where did it start and stem from? Um, that's what I don't really know, because all of a sudden it just kind of blew up and kind of started with the whole um, COVID misinformation stuff, and then it turned to that. And it seems like they weren't able to stick with the COVID stuff, so they turned to something else. And not condoning what he said or whatever. I think But at the same time, like in context, I don't think it was the best thing of usage or what he said, or you should never really say that stuff. But yeah, just interesting to like, I want to know where that came from, or is it like, I don't know. It's weird to kind of see that because I felt the same way. Like people I see, everybody's like, this is not a big deal. What do you? I support him. You know what I mean? I don't
The
know.
first person that I actually heard it from is Joe Rogan himself. I think the first thing, like, I didn't even realize that this video had come out until Joe Rogan himself had posted on Instagram a sorry video, which
Yeah,
of itself, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of celebrities, that go through these things would have to wait and go through a press
wait,
conference. And now it's like, no, he can just post that right there and then. It's like, doesn't matter,
yeah,
boom. It's out there. It's changed the game for sure as well. It's really interesting how this scandal played out. I'm going to call it a scandal in quotes because
yeah,
it's, in a lot of, I think in a previous time where information wasn't so free flowing, where people decentralized media wasn't as, I mean, the media is still centralized. Twitter and Instagram still have ultimate control of what goes and doesn't go, but overwhelmingly they allow things to go, especially if they're,
yeah.
not obscene. And it so it's a lot more decentralized. You can get a lot more opinions, and the thing that was very strong was the amount of, not the single, like a single person saying this or whatever, but the amount of people and them all having a small part, and then you just getting this over and over and over again. And maybe our feeds were uh a little influenced by our preferences, and
Yeah.
that changed what we saw compared to some other people. But I
Either way,
think
it's still out there.
it's still out there.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's still out there, so it still happened, and it still gives more context to the situation, more nuance to the problem. And it doesn't, things aren't so black and white as they were before, although we can all agree that, even Joe Rogan agrees, even the people that support him can agree, like,
yeah,
you know I'm not for one to end speech or say things can't be said. I think that's wrong as well, but there's certain amount of respect that I think everyone appreciates. And that word, a lot of people find it very disrespectful, and there's a lot of baggage that comes with that word, frankly.
for
So
sure.
if you want to use it, I don't think that should be criminalized, or people, even the Spotify's taken down. I think that's a little bit, I understand, but
Yeah,
at the same time, I think it's not
it's
that.
censorship.
Yes, it's censorship, and it's huge censorship because he doesn't
Yeah,
have those episodes out in other places, so now they're not available
yeah,
anywhere. So again, we have to be aware that, like, yeah, we can say what we want to say, but people, there's sort of context and stigma against some words, and they come with consequences.
yeah. I think I agree, and it's scary too because it kind of sets the precedent for like moving forward, and like, okay, so then what's accepted to be, bad or censored again? Obviously that's a different word, um, but yeah, it's so scary because you don't know what the future holds, and it's kind of like the beginning of maybe censoring that could get worse and worse. But yeah, I do agree. I think like I feel the same way, and I'm a black person as well, so I like felt that okay, probably shouldn't be saying that stuff, dude. And I think like the Planet of the Apes comment that he talked about, like I think that was a little too much for sure. Um, but even like David Goggins said it, like, and other people that have been on his show that are also black, like, hey, I don't think he's a racist. I don't think he was meaning it that way. I think he probably. I don't. I agree. He shouldn't have said it. Bad. There's no reason for him to say it. Um, there's no reason for him to say those comments about the Planet of the Apes thing. But at the same time, I've been around him, um, and I don't think he's that way. So I think I don't know. You just I think for being around people like, and those obviously people have sat in the room with him. Um, Especially a person like David Goggins, I don't think he would be bullshitting, if he felt a certain way or whatever it may be. So I don't know. It's an interesting topic. Race is always a very interesting topic, and I think probably both you and I can empathize with like the race side of things, with like growing up where we grew up in Orange County, a very like white dominated area, and having a little bit of it's a segueing into a different topic, but having a little bit of like a I don't know, feeling out of place at times. I'd put it that way. Um,
Yes.
I don't know. Well, go ahead.
I listened to, have you heard of I forget his name. He's an astronaut, Navy SEAL, and doctor, Harvard doctor. Have you heard of him? Um,
Astronaut, Navy
he's
SEAL,
of Korean descent.
Johnny Kim.
Johnny Kim, that's him.
I just googled him.
He actually has a crazy story. He's of Korean descent, and I'm not going to say the crazy part of his story that happened right before he joined the Navy SEALs. He had a podcast with Jocko Willink, and it was excellent. I really, really
I'll have to
enjoyed that
listen.
podcast. Yes. But he says at one point, and I felt this exactly. He says that when he grew up, not until he joined the Navy SEALs, he felt like he had one foot in his American world and one foot in his Korean world, which is like his family, his I believe his church also, or just his friends that he grew up with. And his mom was a Korean immigrant, so who they felt comfortable with as well. And that is exactly how I felt
Yeah.
for most of my childhood until a certain point in playing football for high school. We were both on the same football team, but most certainly, being an Iranian immigrant, that was always pretty obvious. Was there is a lot of nuances. Not I was born here, so
Mhm.
there's a lot of nuances
So
in the
you're
home.
second generation, right?
Second generation. So,
Yeah.
yep, my parents came over and they were not born
Mhm.
here. But there's a lot of differences in the way we're raised. And there's how the house runs is a little different. And then
Yeah.
how you approach kind of everyone else, when you go to school, how you approach everyone is going to be different than how everyone else is. And it's even the same with, I can't imagine, but possibly with race, because race comes with different cultures and different other sort of aspects as well, that it's going to change occasionally how people interact, because how they were interacted in their home is not
The
similar.
same. Yeah. It's interesting because like I never experienced that in terms of like, you know, having like the way I was brought up wasn't, I would say, maybe any differently. I was probably a little bit more raised a little bit more strict, tight, and narrow. Just my dad, that's how he was. But I would say like it wasn't different because I was still, you know, my parents are still born here and all that stuff. But you know, I think what you mentioned about like having two separate lives. I think for me it was more like I didn't know who to fit in with. Like I didn't necessarily feel white, but I didn't also necessarily feel black because for the black kids at school, I wasn't black enough, and then for the white kids, I wasn't white either, but I also wasn't black. So like it was just a weird like I didn't ever feel like I was like I always kind of felt like I was in the middle. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it wasn't necessarily the aspect that you felt, um, but similar in a way where it's like I still felt different, and I didn't know where to fit in. You know what I mean?
Yes. How do you think that affected your thinking growing up?
Um, I don't know. I kind of I think I was more reserved because of it. Um,
Yes.
because I didn't know like I was kind of always afraid to like I didn't know if I was gonna fit in, you know what I mean? So I was always kind of hesitant to like join a crowd because I didn't know if I was gonna fit in or not. So I think that definitely played aspect. I was kind of just wait for people to approach me instead because of that, and I was just definitely a little bit more reserved. Um, I think that stands today. I'm obviously a lot different from when I was in high school, but at the same time, I think that definitely played a role. I'm gonna stand up real quick. I think it's just motion activated lights, but keep talking. I'm still here. There you go.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes. That can definitely play a role. I mean, I think that played a role with me too. I mean, I've been reserved for most of my life. I would say I'm still reserved.
Yeah.
I've decided to be a bit more extroverted recently, but I would say most certainly I haven't felt I was overweight too most of my childhood, so that doesn't help either. But still, the fact that I wasn't American, the fact that, I was Middle Eastern, there was definitely some, jokes in.
Especially post 9/11 and all that stuff, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, even on our football team, I had to prove myself. There were people
Yeah.
saying some when you think about it in the context, like I didn't take it too seriously. I really didn't take it too seriously. A lot
Yeah.
because you get called that stuff a lot. And it's like, so, when you think about it, like as a 25 plus year old or 23 plus year old, it's like, dang, that's some pretty serious
Yeah.
stuff. But like when you're a 14-year-old and you're being told by another 14-year-old, and then you're going to go back and just like demonize, another boy that's easier to pick on than you. And so it's not so big of a deal, but like
Yeah.
there were a lot of words like, you know, terrorist and things like that that you get called. And it's like, okay. I mean, you don't take it as big of a deal, but it does create some sort of separation. But to be, again, I didn't take it so seriously. I understand some people take it very seriously. That's
Yeah.
why I think, when you speak like that, again, going back to Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan, I wanted to mention this, is a comedian. So a lot of this was done in pursuit of being funny, which people love comedy. I love good comedy as well. But that's something that like, with comedy, this is a point that has to, do less with what we were just speaking about, but I didn't want to go back. It's like because it's the same thing as, saying this, marks that are derogatory and include race, if you're going to mention someone's race and attempt to use that in a derogatory sense, it's not, even in an empowering sense,
Yeah.
that could be considered racism too. But especially in a sort of derogatory sense, those have consequences. And a lot of jokes, people don't mean them, but the words still are heard. People kind of, don't necessarily care if it's even a joke or if it's in the pursuit of being in a joke. They don't, some people, if 95 people in the room are laughing, some 5 people really don't care about if it's funny. And, we, it's strange because I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon.
I don't think so either. Yeah, I don't either. And I think, I don't know. I think there's also a balance though. Like,
Yes.
I think the comedians, I think you could tell it's like, okay, it's kind of meant, but they also, most of them at least, I think don't say it in like in a way that's
Aggressive.
attacking, or I think it's just like kind of like, hey, we all know that this is the truth, so I'm just gonna say it, but nobody wants to say it, so I'm gonna say it. It's gonna be funny. And I think it's, as long as it's like in that form, that's okay. I think too often people are too quick to blame, or just like sometimes just don't take yourself so seriously. And I feel like that's what's happening with this whole situation. It's a little bit different because obviously it's the way in which that should never be said the way he said it, but um, not even him, but just in general, there's other people that have been canceled for weird shit that should be canceled. Or I don't know an example off the top of my head. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I'll put it that way.
No, neither do I. And like you said, it's we can't be so quick with our blame, and we got to, if we want to really take a solid stance on something, we have to have some knowledge about it, at least some knowledge worth committing to. And like, we should also be willing to, this is very tough for people. This is very tough for me. And so I know it's tough for everyone, but willing to admit that we were wrong
Yes.
about something is not easy. Like taking
No.
the blame and saying, okay, I messed up and I'm doing something that's incorrect. And I can tell it's incorrect because things that are going on in my life are not how I want them to be. And
Yeah.
that's not easy for people. But I think in this day and age, if like, and I don't know if this has ever not been true. Like this is probably like an ancient philosophy, like that has always been true. But now, because we have the internet, because we have information available so freely, because we have the ability to put out information so quickly, so rapidly, with so little thought, that it's just in our best interest to take these things a little slower, to digest them a little slower. And like, I'm guilty of it too. Like, I'll find something and I'll post it. And it's like, do I really understand? Like, even in Twitter, we'll do
Yeah.
it. It's like, you want to retweet this article? Have you read this article? And it's like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
maybe, that's a great title, but maybe I should read this article. And
I'm quick to do that too. Even just sending you DMs like, oh, I'll read it quick, and then boom, send. Sometimes I don't read like the full article, but yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because the headlines get you, and like, oh, that's interesting, but you don't know what's even in it, you know.
no, and that's not going to say that like
Bless you.
we're going to, thank you. It's not going to say that we're going to completely stop doing that, because like still
No.
like those quick one-liners are still powerful in some sense. And but it's just, in our benefit. I think it's going to be tough to do otherwise with this higher amount of information or this more streamlined availability of information. And again, going back to the this idea of discriminating against, like, it's going to be tough. I mean, people are, skeptical and have a bit of paranoia, or, are not too confident of the future. But I think, you know, the reaction to the death of George Floyd was very intense, very, very strong, very, very powerful. Debatably, not that, some people weren't happy about it, but the police officer that ended up, who was in that video, got huge repercussions against him. So did the other officer. It just didn't work out well for those two. And I think one thing that we have to realize is, like, there are more cameras and microphones out there than ever before. Way more. We can be recorded almost at any time. There's probably many times of the day that we are being recorded just by being
Yeah.
outside or being in a public environment.
I
And
have cameras in this little building right here. Like, I know
yes,
they're actively recording. So
yes. So it's like, we can say this stuff, and, like I said, yeah, I was discriminated against by our high school teammates our freshman year of football. And eventually, 2 or 3 years down the line, we were great friends, and no one was saying any of these words towards, me. And that's from, going through trials and experiences together, which we can speak about some other time. But that is a little bit more excusable. 14-year-old boys, it's going to be boys are going to be boys. But even then, I think it's going to be a little tougher, because the policing on children is going to be easier for teachers too. It's going to be harder for kids to, get away with things. Maybe cyberbullying is probably still pretty crazy and probably even
yeah,
easier for kids to do. So maybe, it's not going to be a traditional form of bullying, but I can imagine that there's probably some cyber stuff that kids can do to other kids that will be not not very kind. But again,
yeah,
it's going to be like, I've listened to a lot of cybersecurity podcasts, and a lot of times these are kids doing these really crazy hacking projects, and they get caught. A lot of times, sometimes they don't, but a lot of times these cyber security guys, especially if they're based in the US, it's going to be tough for them to not get caught. If they're international, it's a lot, if they're, based in some, Russia or China or North Korea or somewhat, that's going to be a lot tougher to find for, as far as talking from the state of America. But if a cyber bully is like 13 years old and he's doing some crazy, picking on some kids in a way, you know, some of his classmates or whatever, and he's American, I think the American authorities have the capability to find this child
yeah,
and maybe not, do what they would, not bring down the legal repercussions that they would on an adult, but still that's going to have consequences, and it's going to be really tough still. I mean, with that said, that cyber bully is still going to get a lot of bullying in before he gets caught. So,
yeah. Plenty,
it,
and it's still going to impact whoever the kid
exactly,
is or whatever it may be. That was going to be a
exactly.
question I asked you too. Like, with, I know you said like with certain people, like it didn't affect you and your friendship long term. But like in the midst of it, did you ever feel like a certain way? Like I know like on the outside, like it's like, oh, whatever, you didn't react, but like, did it internally make you feel a certain way?
Yes. One time it was done in the office and it was very minor. It was very small. I'll say what it was. Uh, I was in the office and then me and this individual, my coworker, were speaking and, you know, we didn't see, eye to eye. And he said, all right, whatever you say, Aladdin. And I just stopped and walked. I think I gave him a look of disgust and then just walked away without any word. I didn't take this to my manager or anything. Didn't want to make a big scene because I know it's just it's really minor and it's not a big deal, but that will probably never leave my mind. And I
Yeah,
don't even think that that individual
thinks about it.
thinks, no, not definitely not thinks about it, but it's different because I've heard this individual talk about race and even talk about their own race in certain ways. So it's, you know, they're of a race that gets discriminated against too. And so I hear them say discriminating things about their own race, which
Hmm.
is kind of interesting because, they're obviously doing it in a sort of jestful way. So, but with that same thing being said, I will probably never forget that. That was, unlike when that happened to me when I was 14 years old, I was over 23 years old at that time. And this was a professional environment. And so I felt something immediately. I was like, I can't even, like, you're going to, because it wasn't lighthearted.
Yeah,
Like we mentioned before, comedians will sometimes say something and it's not aggressive, but this was like we were disagreeing and there was some sort of like, tension, not maybe not tension, but there was like something between us where it was like I thought one way, he thought one other way, and he used this word in a slightly derogatory sense towards me in a completely out of the blue. Like,
yeah.
what's the point of even bringing that up?
That's that's what two things. One, I would have gotten fired because I would have beat some ass. So more power to you. Um, but yeah, that's ridiculous. I feel like there's some part of like people that use those terms as a way of like feeling like they're better than you, or like I don't know. It's like they know it's gonna eat at you or gonna like make you feel a certain way, and so I feel like they're like, oh well, I know how I can get under his skin to say this, and it's like it's demeaning instead of like I don't know. It's just it's sad that some people think that way.
It is sad. Have you felt it in like the moment, or have you felt?
Yeah, yeah, I for sure. I don't. I will say like I haven't ever. Like, college was really eye opening for me for a lot of reasons. But in high school, I felt like there were certain people similar to your situation that would like call me the N word and like just just to like make themselves feel more powerful or something. I don't know what it was, but it was a weird like kind of like flex, like, hey, you were whatever. I don't really understand it. But that was also similar to what you said. Like I was 16, 17. So like whatever. Like I just kind of like got over it. Not that I ever should have, but at that time you're just kind of like whatever. But I think the one interesting thing was like I didn't necessarily feel different in college. I more so felt like I didn't feel like judged for who I was, but like for a lot of my college friends, I was like their first black friend,
Wow.
which was just like an interest. They were like wanted to just, they were more enamored by like me being black and like wanted to know about me. So that was like an interesting feeling where I felt different, but I didn't necessarily feel judged, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Um, and there's been a lot of scenarios where like I feel, and maybe it's just me feeling this way. And I don't know if it's actually that way, but there's a lot of times where I like walk in, especially when I lived in Nebraska, um, where it's very like predominantly white, and you walk in and like you feel like eyes just on you because you just look different, and it's kind of an interesting feeling because there's not a lot of diversity um, in Nebraska specifically. So that was, I think, more of an eye-opening, interesting experience than I didn't necessarily feel like judged or anything like that. But there's been a couple of occasions where um, like people have like used that against me or like, but it's never been anything like what you've mentioned, other than like high school, which I think is a little bit different experience, you know.
Yes. It's very interesting. How do you think, I don't know, what do you feel now that you're in Chicago?
I mean, everybody there's so diverse in Chicago, um, so it's like night and day, you know. Um, so I feel normal now. It's like, oh, there's everywhere I go, there's different races or you know there's different everything here. And I think that's kind of a nice thing. And I don't feel different. I kind of feel like I fit in, you know, which is kind of a
Yes.
nice thing. I don't know. I enjoy it.
I enjoy it too. I feel that
Yeah.
way as well. What how do you think that change, well, I guess for Nebraska, how do you think that changes the community?
Well, it's a good question. I feel like they're uh, a lot less open to other ideas and or yeah, other ideas because not necessarily ideas. I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. Maybe just open. They're a lot less open because I feel like a lot of times they're just surrounded by what they're familiar with. A lot of
Yes.
people don't go anywhere else. They all stay in Nebraska. They don't move anywhere. Like everybody's born and raised there. They'll stay there. They'll live there until they die. They stay in the same little area. They know the same few people. They don't really branch out and go anywhere else. And I think because of that, you lack experience and you lack meeting other people, and then because of that you have the same opinions around the people who are around you, and then you can't formulate your own opinion. So then you just like there's not a lot of openness. Is a good way to put it. So I don't know. I think that's what I've noticed, and I think that's why. Like rural areas are so I'm not going to get in the politicals, but like they're one side of the spectrum, and then very big cities are the other side of the spectrum because there's a lot more, diversity in the bigger cities. And if you look at every city, it's definitely one way over the other. You know what I mean?
Yes. And yeah, like you said, it's there's going to be a lot less variety and experience if we're living in a rural place versus a, very metropolitan place where, I walk here in San Diego and it's like I'm hearing Portuguese. I walk here in
Yeah,
San Diego, I'm going to hear Spanish very often, but like not just Spanish and English, like there's some other like French, Portuguese, uh, you know, Chinese too, because there's
Yeah.
people from Chinese nationals here as well, Vietnamese people as well. So, and you meet these people and you're just like, for me, it's like, I think one good thing was even in football, there was a pretty diverse, we didn't have a lot of black people in our Orange County high school, but most of the black people we did have played football.
Yeah.
And we also had Mexicans on there, and we had a pretty good amount of Iranians on there, Persians on there
We
too,
did.
Middle
Yeah.
Eastern people.
Yeah.
So it was nice to, get that mix of Americans of all types, of all ethnicities in um, in one, or different ethnicities, not all, but different ethnicities
Yeah.
in one team, playing one sport, going for one goal. And, for me, that was huge because I got to see really close into much closer into the world of, Americans than I had before. But even
That's
where we
the
grew, what?
Sorry, I was gonna say that's like one of the really cool things about sports
Yes.
is regardless of, you know, race, even for fans, like regardless of what you are, like if you're a fan of the Raiders, for example, like you're gonna put that aside and you're gonna root for the Raiders. And I think
Yes.
that's like if I feel I wish that was that way for everything. You know what I mean? Where
Yes.
it's just like, hey, you are who you are, and you do what you do, and I'm gonna root for you. Like that's it's not that way, but I think that's like one of the really cool things about sports.
Yes. Sports are very good in that sense. And, you know, it's a really good way because it's, organized competition. So we can have that sort of, competitive aspect and not make it like aggressive to the point of upsetting people or hurting people.
Yeah,
It's just, unless it's part of the sport, but then that's something you sign up for. And it's not like, it's not an assault against against someone in some way, whether that
yeah,
be physical or emotional or however it may be. But I agree with you. And, that's a good thing about sports, but it's also kind of a strange thing about sports too, because you and I talk sports. You love the Raiders, I love the Chargers. And, I say a lot of terrible things about the Raiders, but we know it's like kind of a joke.
banter.
Yeah, it's banter. And we have, conversations about things outside of sports as well. But that's one thing that sports are good, but at the same time, it's also really easy to use sports as a conversation topic when it's like there's not too much, there's not going to be much depth in that
Yeah,
conversation if it's just sports. And there's nothing, sports are great. I think, the fact that someone can pursue athleticism as a way to make money is amazing. And, you
yeah,
know, we love our entertainers, and sports, athletes are no doubt some of the most like I've gotten into the UFC within the last 2 years, and some of
hmm
those guys are just, as much as they're fighters, they're entertainers. And the ones who are
oh,
entertainers
absolutely.
are the ones that are selling out the tickets and the ones that people value. So we love our entertainers, and sports are like that. But again, it's like the Olympics too. It's like we've got these nations, and there's a little bit of tension between these nations every here and there. But that's, everyone's going to come together for the sports, and just say, okay, this is where we're going to put, a lot of competition right now. but it's not the real world. The Olympics are going to end in 2 weeks, and then everyone's going
Yeah,
to go back to ground
Joe
zero.
Rogan.
Joe Rogan. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
no, I
go,
agree. I was just say I think all too often is it an excuse, or like is it it's almost sometimes too mindless of like a conversation topic. Like, oh, if I don't know what to talk about, I'm gonna talk like, and I think that's there's friends or former friends that I have spoken with, just like it's like that's all you talk about. It's like, hey man, like I want to know who you are and like more about like what you do and outside of like just sports. Like I like sports, I love talking about it, and it's fun to talk about every once in a while. But like I don't need that to be the main. Like I find it with the people who I speak with that are my friends and or close friends. Rarely is sports the main conversation of like it might be brought up here and there, but like there's been plenty of conversations that have been had that have been like, we're go like 2 hours without talking. It's like, oh shit, that's nice, like we didn't talk about sports and we had a really great conversation. It's kind of like refreshing, you know what I mean?
yes, it is refreshing. And frankly, we're just not very involved with sports either.
Yeah,
It's not like I love the Chargers and you love the Raiders, but it's not like either of us are going to change the outcomes of those football games because of something we do.
it's not our identity either.
No, it's not our identity either. And that's another interesting thing too. That can be brought up with race as well. It's like, is my race my identity? That's a very big question today. And that's a nuanced question with a complicated and not black or white answer.
What do you feel like the answer to that is?
It's I mean, you know, I'm a Iranian American, so by blood I've gotten a DNA test. I'm supposedly 97 plus percent Northwest Iranian. And so, but
97.
97 plus percent. And
It's crazy. I feel like I've
no go
2% what?
2.5% Italian.
That's crazy. I feel like a lot of people like I've talked about like, oh yeah, I got a DNA test, and I'm like not anywhere close to like 100% of what I thought I was. So that's crazy that you're 97%. It's nuts.
Yes, it is nuts. And I don't know, there's a lot. So it definitely plays a part. And I think a reason that it might have it's going to be different now. And I do believe that where we're born and raised plays a huge part, because I know Asian Americans, I am Iranian American, you're African American and Latin American, right? Or
Yep.
Mexican American. So it's
Yeah.
like, and there's no way that I can say that me having, been Iranian American didn't play a huge influence on my life. So maybe it can be considered part of my identity, but it is not something that I hold, tattooed. And I'm not necessarily in the majority here, but some, I know Iranian Americans who are deeply, deeply proud of
Proud.
their
Yeah.
Iranian heritage, and they would consider being an Iranian part of their identity. And I think that it was a big part of my life, and I think it does play a part in who I am today. But I've meditated a lot in my life, and one of the big things in meditation is we're ever changing. So for me, one of the big things that's stronger ever now, stronger more than ever, is my, you know, me realizing I'm American. And even though I am of Iranian descent, I don't, on a day in, day out basis, most of the people I'm talking, almost no one I talk to is Iranian. Almost
Yeah.
no one. My parents might be the ones. I talk to Vietnamese Americans, white Americans, Jewish Americans. Um, those are some of the ones that I'm just thinking they're my neighbors and I speak to them. Mexican Americans all the time. And so right now I'm much, and the common thing between all four of us, or all five, if you can include me as a Middle Eastern American, is we're all Americans, we're all Californians, we're all San Diegans. And for me, that's become much more important, even through COVID, because I used to travel too. So for work, so I traveled, extensively
Yeah.
internationally, and I've seen, been to places, I've been to many different countries, and I think the one thing gained an appreciation within these last 2 years because we had so little option in moving, and we were kind of forced, especially in 2020 and early 2021, the appreciation for my country, my state, and my city. A lot of people give California a lot of flack. That's fine. There's a lot of issues. I don't agree with a lot of things going on with the government, and a lot of the majority of the population feels that I don't feel the same, but I love California. And so that's something for me at this moment, I feel has shaped my identity more, especially in the last 10 years since
Yeah.
school, where it's been like, okay, you know, I went in a fraternity too. Like you said, you had a lot of friends that were never had a black friend before. And so you were immersed in a whole new world. And you were born and raised in California. So you also moved to Vegas and to Nebraska and to Chicago, which is way different than Orange County.
Yeah.
And like, so what do you think? Like being through those, four states and through those, I think very four different types of, you've got suburban, you've got Vegas, which is kind of its own beast. You've got Nebraska suburban, and then you've got metropolitan Chicago. What can you say after, having been through those different parts of America?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think I kind of agree, like, with you in that. I think to a certain extent, yes, it is like part of me, and it's always going to be part of me. Um, but I also realize that, like, everywhere I go, I'm going to meet great people, regardless of their race and regardless of my race. There's going to be people who accept me for the way I am, and there's going to be some people who don't. And I'm going to choose to be around people who do. And I've always found every place I've gone, whether it's Vegas, Nebraska, Chicago, um, California, I've always found people that I like gravitate towards, or who gravitate towards me for one reason or another, regardless of rate. And that's never been like a thing that has been foundationally of like how we connected. It's always been just like, hey, we're friends because we're friends, you know. And I think so. To answer your question, like, never been, especially as I've gotten older. I think it definitely impacted or made me feel different when I was younger because I felt different. But as I kind of have grown up and have learned, and realize how like genuine friendships I've built that are past that, it's like, okay, It doesn't matter. Like, it's just like, as long as you're good people and I'm a good person, like, we're all, to your point, Americans. We're all just in this world trying to survive.
Yes.
And I think that's the most important thing. As long as you're just a good person, and I think I can always get behind that. So to answer your question, I don't think, I don't know. I've never really thought about that. But yeah, I don't think as much as maybe I had figured. But yeah, I also know that there are people that are, you know, um, black and proud, and that's okay too. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I was also, I think it's also how you're raised, I think, somewhat too.
Yes.
I think I wasn't raised that way to like boast about X, Y, and Z. It's like, hey, where you are who you are, and be proud about it. But like, obviously, I'm sure you're proud of your heritage and where you came from and all that stuff, but you're not like boasting about it and telling, shouting from the rooftops, like, this is who I am. Like, it's just like, hey, you are who you are.
Yes. And yes, I agree with that. It's a little tougher to take that sort of viewpoint when we're teenagers,
Yeah.
when a lot of this stuff is going on. And, because when we're teenagers, like, I remember 17 years old getting home and going on Facebook, and what's on Facebook is a huge deal. That's the world
Yeah.
at that moment. So, what do you think? Like, what do you think regarding being a teenager and being, discriminated against, and that kind of taking a toll? It's not easy because do you have any what do you think would be a good mentality going forward, or keeping in mind for a teenager that's going through that, or even an adult?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I think like realizing that, kind of what I said earlier, like, there's going to be people who treat you certain ways, and there's nothing you can do about it. Um, and there's going to be people who accept you for who you are, and that's just going to be the way it is. And there's not anything you can do to change, regardless of. I mean, it's similar with like politics. Like, if you talk politics with somebody, like, you're never going to change someone's view. It's just like, that's
No.
just the way it is. And I feel like a lot of that's just the way people are, and then it's ingrained in them, and it is the way it is. Um, so I feel like that's, I don't know, it's hard to change someone's thought process on that stuff. So I think just understanding that, and understanding that, there's going to be good people, there's going to be bad people that you run into, and you got to just kind of overcome. I also think going through those things, though, was also kind of like an eye-opening experience looking back now, because then you're like, oh, that guy was, he was just young. Or, there's other scenarios where like, that guy was a piece of shit. Like, like, there's a couple of those where I've looked back and I'm like, that guy was just a piece. And now I understand why he probably was talking to me that way, because where he is at now, for example,
Yes.
or maybe we're friends now. It's like, okay, we're cool, and he was just young and dumb, and I don't feel like he feels that way, or whatever it may be. So I think it's like having perspective, and it gives you perspective for the people that you meet in the future too, and um, people that you potentially keep in touch with.
Yes. And I think, being smart about it is good. Like, um, I was in the park the other day. I've got a big beard, and I look Middle Eastern, and I was doing some exercises, and a very senile woman was screaming some race, I say senile because she was old and she was literally screaming nonstop at nobody, maybe 10 yards, 15 yards away from me. Not many people were near us. And she was screaming some pretty racially and nationally headed words,
Mm.
saying some things like just saying things as though, people have their culture, people have their religion, they come here and then they don't learn our language and then we have to, do something, but it's better for these people to go right there, to just go on a plane and leave. And this woman was very old and
So directed towards you.
I don't think it wasn't directed towards me, but we were the only people that were not walking, just we were bystanders just walking by. We were both planted there doing our own things, having our, areas. This was in a park, so she had a tapestry out and some things out, and I had my own backpack out and I was doing my exercises. And so, it's pretty easy, that example, because you see she's older, you
Yeah.
see she's literally screaming at no one by herself. It's still upsetting to hear because it's just like, okay, I don't know if it was directed at me, but obviously I didn't say a word, so he doesn't know what I look like or how I sound, doesn't know that I have an American accent and that I can speak English fluently. And I know what I look like. I have a big black beard and I have, pretty brown tan skin. So, I hear that and I'm just like, I'm just going to walk away. So I walked away,
Yeah.
Maybe 50, 70 yards to a position where there was a tree, a, huge bunch of trees, a huge bunch of bushes, in between us. So I couldn't hear her and she couldn't see me and I couldn't see her. So I know, even, for that example I alluded to earlier, being called Aladdin in an office environment, and I said I didn't, take that up or take that to a higher level. You know, forgiveness is critical, and I don't think forgiveness is critical because, I do think it is critical because we want to be kind to people, most certainly. I think that's important. I think if you're able to meet that sort of aggressive tone with kindness, that person will be more inclined to realize this is not this. I don't know what I'm
It's
saying. I
not the
don't
way.
think
Yeah.
it's not the way. So, but I think it's also really easy to, you know, take it back, you know, spit some, say something racially aggressive happens to us. And then, take that example, whoever's that single individual or that single group of individuals, what they're saying, and say, oh, look at all those people that are of certain, ethnicity or descent. And they're saying these things about me. Obviously, those people are bad people. And then creating that sort of stigma back at
Yeah.
them. I think
Like the
that's,
energy of that then gets brought into your. Yeah, I get what you're saying, 100%.
yes,
And that's it's like a vicious cycle then at that point.
yes. And you
Yeah.
know what? That vicious cycle has probably been going on for a long time, and that vicious cycle will probably not end anytime soon. But I do think that if we're part of that vicious cycle, we suffer at the end of the day. It's like,
Yeah.
if we get in there, it's like other people will suffer as well. The people that we put that, energy out on, of that aggressive, negative, demeaning energy out on. But more importantly, for the every single person, almost, some people, less importantly, they can really care about how they go about other, their interactions with other people. But for most people, how they feel is, prime. Maybe
Yeah.
everybody, maybe that's 100%. I don't know. That's a really philosoph- philosophical debate. But I think the reason that we want to, you know, take that in, realize it, and meet it with forgiveness, and then just walk ourselves out of that vicious cycle, because maybe that person will just be in that cycle for the rest of their life, but you're not going to be there. You're going to be able
Yeah.
to go forward, and they might meet someone else who's willing to play that game. Hopefully not, but we won't be in that. And we can just, it's a lot of negative energy. I don't think it makes us feel good, but even worse, it's like that energy and that terrible feeling take away from so much other things that could be incredible, so positive that it's not even worth, but it is worth realizing, we don't want to be left in a vulnerable state. That's very irresponsible.
Yeah.
And if that's something, if it gets to that level where you're, you know, being, physical, emotional, whatever, mental well-being is being at stake, then forgiveness, I still think, is the answer, but maybe not the immediate answer. Maybe the immediate answer is finding a place where you feel comfortable and safe, and you're able to take in that with a little bit more clear thinking, because it's really easy to get caught up in, and it's really easy for like something to go back to Joe Rogan, to say something. He didn't necessarily do it from aggressiveness, but he said things he didn't mean. He said things, and he wished he could take them back. And it's really easy to say those types of things.
Yeah. It's very easy. And it's also easy to react uh, out of anger, which is what
Yes.
everybody. That's how people react. It's just anger, like immediate flip a switch and people react. That's why I said I'm impressed that you like just kind of like were like, hey, after that whole comment that it was made at work, like I have a very pretty even keeled, but like in certain situations I snap and I like don't take I don't know if I could have reacted that way. So that's more power to you 100%. But yeah, I think like anger is like people's first form of reacting. And I think if people were to take that approach more and like take a second and just like take a breath and just like, all right, like I can't control this person, right? Like this is not in my control. I can control though how I react to this. I think it would be a lot better of a place, put it that way.
Wow. It Yes, it would be. And that is, like we've been saying, is probably not going to happen anytime soon. But I think there's still some positive things to come out from it. I think things could be easier today than they have been in the before, because people are able to communicate. I think there's going to be a lot more unification of a single, or maybe like several languages that everyone can speak, which hopefully can level some playing field and give some context to different aspects of race. It's not simple.
No,
It it's not going to be easy.
no, I agree. But I think there's a lot of really good um, like forums that are being developed now. Like just even the podcast forum is such a I think such a good space for like discussions to have been had that weren't being had before because of television and just like the long form conversations of situations and conversations like this that are being had today. that I don't think were necessarily had, or they were being had, but they were behind closed doors, you know.
Yes.
So I think like having that information out there is great. It's still interesting though. I still feel like it's a conversation that, regardless of who you are, nobody really wants to talk about it
No.
because it's still kind of an uncomfortable conversation, which is interesting.
Yes.
But it is. It's like it's just it's a weird topic that it's hard to like put a pin on like what exactly or why it's weird. I guess history, but it's just kind of a weird thing.
It is a weird thing. And, you know, America doesn't particularly have it's a pretty short history, but again, our history is very well documented and we're all very
Yeah.
aware of it. So there isn't, it's not too pretty when it comes to race. And over the last 2 years, I think I've realized the nuance between the difference between being African American and being a minority of another sort, even Native American for sure, but it's not the same. And the relationship with the country isn't the same. And, there's a lot more history with this country in particular, and being black in this country,
Yeah.
it's it's pretty complicated. And like you said, you weren't raised in that sort of environment where over, I don't even want to say that, but just to be very aware and very in a certain direction or certain opinion about this aspect, this being black in America.
Uh, okay, so yes and no. Like I agree in that it was in a certain extent, like not to the extent of, if I was born and raised in an area that was a little bit more heavily dominated by that and whatever. Like my dad grew up in Memphis, for example. Like I know he went through a lot of stuff, but like for example, because he grew up in the 80s with the whole, there was issues then too, and that was, and then my grandparents, his parents like had civil rights issues, so it's like those stories were then told to me, and kind of passed on to like, although I didn't necessarily have to deal specifically with it, I was raised as like a, hey, you have to know you're different and you can't do these things because of you being a certain color or race, because this may happen to you. So like even just like getting pulled over, like my dad always like if you get pulled over, but like do not do anything, because, and that's something I grew up with knowing without really understanding why,
Yes.
but it was like something that I always knew, like get pulled over, yes sir, no sir, hands on the wheel, don't make any movements, just like it's weird. Like thinking back to that at 15, learning to drive, like having my dad tell me that, it's like now it's like, oh wow, that's fucking crazy. But um like at the time it's like, oh, like why is he telling me this? I didn't really understand because I didn't really have to deal with that as much, being that I was in Orange County. You know what I mean?
Yes. And those are the types of things, I can't even imagine most black people, not most black Americans have to deal with. And like you said, you grew up in Orange County. There's some other places in America where, particularly black people and minorities live in, and they are not safe places. And
Yeah.
those sort of, lessons, I can't even imagine, for people in more impoverished situations, in much less secure homes, that it's still the same, issue. You're you're black, you live in America, there's certain things, certain, pretty negative aspects of society that may affect you more negatively than they would others if you act in a certain way. That, growing up with that and realizing that and seeing it, which, it I don't know, I haven't been aware of that, but I haven't really gone in search of it, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's something I'm fortunate that I didn't have to like deal with specifically. Um, but I think like just my sister and myself both, I feel like we both kind of experienced similar like feelings of that. Um, the whole identity crisis was a weird thing because you don't know where to fit. But yeah, I don't think I experienced as much of like um feeling any. I don't know. It's different. Different is not the right word because it definitely felt different, but it didn't feel attacked negatively or any. I don't know. I don't know the right way to put it, but it's definitely interesting to like grow up like having to be aware of that. You know, is that like a talk you ever had to have like with your parents? Um, and
no.
I know obviously no.
Well, I was shielded, to be honest. Like,
Yeah,
I didn't really realize the repercussions of me being Middle Eastern and 9/11 for a
yeah,
long, like, I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't realize that there may have been some, you know, racially motivated actions, that weren't necessarily positive towards Middle Eastern people. I didn't
yeah,
see it. It's pretty, being 8 years old, it's like, I don't think most kids our age realized it. It wasn't until I would say 12 or 13 where the race thing became pretty obvious. And it's like, I started hanging out with only Iranians from the age of 11 to 14. I was only hanging out with Iranians. And I'm really happy I played football in the sense that I got a lot of non-Iranian friends, and it was
yeah.
really good for my Americanization and becoming an American, just like through experience. But
Do you feel like
you go,
I was gonna say, do you feel like you gravitated towards them because it was like safe?
yes, because we were all
Yeah,
comfortable together. Absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, it had to be that way. I mean, I don't know if it had to be, but like just thinking about it, when I say had to be, it's like I think just
When
like
you're that young.
looking, yeah, it, I didn't realize it, I didn't choose it, but just I think being Iranian and you know, it was easier for them to understand where I was coming from. It was even easier
Yeah.
for our parents to get along with each other.
Mhm.
And so with all that, it's, yeah, it makes sense. And then right when I joined football, it was like, hanging out with these other guys so much more. It's like they're
Yeah,
really who I'm going to spend most of my time with. But yeah, probably because it was comfortable, very comfortable and
yeah,
very, very, easy. What
yeah.
about you? You said that you didn't really feel comfortable in either situation, in either demographic group.
No, I didn't. Because I didn't like. We didn't really have a very big um, black population at our high
No.
school. Um, but I did. I still didn't ever feel like I didn't. I feel like I was always told I wasn't black enough because I don't really look black or fully black. Um, I'm only half, but I also didn't feel like I was like white or Mexican or like I'm kind of a mixture of everything. So
Yes.
it's like I didn't really know where to fit in, and I felt um I gravitated towards uh because of that. I feel like I gravitated towards more like just the white people because I felt comfortable. Like I don't know why. It's just like that's what was always, I don't know, for me. But I also know it's definitely a different experience for you, like during that time too. So yeah, I feel like I gravitated towards. I don't know though, because I played sports literally from like kindergarten all the way up until high school. So I feel like I was always finding new friends that were different races, and I feel like that also allowed me the ability to like just meet multiple people, and I just like stuck with certain people. But yeah, I don't necessarily feel like I gravitated towards a certain race or black people or anything like that. Because of that, though, is because didn't necessarily feel like I was a part of one specific group.
Got it.
Identity crisis.
And do you think that that's the awesome thing about sports, really? Football too is probably the most intense because the amount of coordination between the team is takes a lot of time to put in.
Yes.
So, and it's a pretty brutal game, so that aspect also makes it pretty different than other sports. But even when we said earlier, like, talking about sports, talking about professional sports is mostly like kind of what I think we were alluding to earlier, but actually playing sports, like I am, if I am to have a child in the future, I've, been considering what about homeschooling and all that, and thinking to myself, maybe homeschooling is good because for me, the biggest value I got out of school as far as socially was through sports, was through football. I mean, that, you know, was like the best social outlet I had versus going to school was like, I don't know.
School. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
You
school and it
had to
was
be there, right?
had to be there and I formed some great relationships, but the last 4 years, easily the best relationships I formed were with the teammates. And my first 5 years in elementary school, I mean, I still have some great friends from elementary school, like people that I keep in touch with that like I really care about their lives. But it's not, I don't know, it's interesting. And what role like
It's different
social
when you
go?
I was gonna say it's different when you go to battle or like you go
Yes.
through some tough shit with people. Um, like and you're when you're sitting there, blood, sweat, tears, like every day for a whole
Months.
summer, and you're just miserable together. Like there's something that's just different about that because then you can like, hey, it's like you have a newfound respect for one another
Yes.
in a way. Um,
Yes.
I think that's got to be part of it for sure.
I think so too. And it was like what I said, that there were some people our freshmen the summer before our freshman year of high school that said some pretty derogatory things about my race towards me. And then 2 years down the line, 2 3 years, those guys are some of my one of those guys in particular was one of my great friends at that point, and really didn't say, you know he kind of said some racial things, but I don't think it was from a it's easier to take in, especially at that age when it's not, I mean, when it's not obviously not aggressively motivated. But again, I think if he were to look back on the things he said, even if they weren't racially aggressive, being 28, hearing those things, it's like, oh, dang, I didn't really want to say those things so much. And
I was
like
guilty
it,
of that as well.
what?
I was guilty in high school of that myself,
I
being
was
kind of an
guilty of it
asshole.
as well. Yes. And, it's just not going to be easy to get away with. And when we're kids and teenagers, it's kind of, not too big of a deal. But like Joe Rogan found out, it's not, it's kind of a bigger deal when we're older. And it's
Sure.
something that it's not even like we're not even meaning to do it in an aggressive or hurtful way, but people remember. People don't forget the things that they hear regarding derogatory remarks about them. And it's, I think the race thing is, for some reason, it just sticks in people's mind. It sticks in my mind. I've been this whole, the particular events happened like maybe 3 times, and I remember every single one very clearly.
Yeah.
So it's obviously very apparent, and it's in our best interest to be aware of it and speak mindfully.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think it's in a big people's in a like in your memory, for example, um, rightfully so, because it like I feel like part of us wants to just fit in, and
Yes.
with those things, it's like, why are you calling me out for just being who I am? And it's like, why can't you just let me live my life, type of thing? And I think that's part of where it's like, why is that, like, why do you need to say that? Like, why can't I just be Karush, or why can't I just be Michael? It's like, I don't know. I think that's part of why it's such an impactful thing on people who have that happen to them.
Yes. I think so too. It takes away from their humanity a little bit.
100%.
Michael, this was a great conversation. Are there any last words about, you know, race or being discriminated against, or anything we've spoken about that you'd like to say?
Um, Not really. I think no, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think the only thing I'd say is just I love the thought of what you just said, of like the way of reacting to people, um, regardless of what it is, whether it's racially charged or not. There's going to be people that say mean things that aren't that way, but just being responding in a way that's just like, hey, I'm gonna let them being I'm gonna let them be them and just walk away from the situation. And then also like the idea of forgiveness, like those two things, I think kind of hit home to me, of like walking away from this, like, okay, I will keep that in mind more, because I'm guilty of at times, like not always being the best with that. So I think those are two things that I definitely want to take away and think more about and be mindful about moving forward. So that's really all I got on that front. Sorry, walking away for a
My
second.
my guest today has been Michael Carrol. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Michael.
Thanks, Krish.